I'm Andrew Teixeira, I'm an American Artisan. In today's quick and easy project video, we'll be building this Mitered and Splined Keepsake box. It features a removable lid with interior storage. You can find the cut list for this box in the link below, available on my website at americanartisan.com. So let's get started. I'm going to start out with a 40-inch length of maple that I milled up earlier, and I'm going to take a moment to lay out my dado locations. I want a 1/4 inch wide dado, a 1/4 inch down from the top, and a 1/4 inch up from the bottom. I like to take a moment to check my depth. I'm going for a 1/4 inch deep. If it's a little bit deeper, that's okay, but I don't want it too shallow. Once I have the depth set at a 1/4 inch and my fence set for a 1/4 inch, I'm going to go ahead and make my cut on both sides. I like to take an actual panel that I've cut the size according to the cut list and scribe a line to determine where the width of my final dado should land. I'm going to tap the fence over until I get the location right. I like to check to make sure that the fit is good. I should be able to take one of those panels and place it in there and slide it front to back, but it shouldn't wiggle side to side. Now I'm going to cut another dado 1.5 inches down from the top. And this dado is going to be a 1/4 inch wide and a 1/4 inch deep, just like the last one. I'll need to tap the fence over to get that 1/4 inch width again. And that's what our board should look like at this point in the project. So now I want to cut the parts of my box out of my 40-inch length of maple in sequence. I'm going to take the front, I'm going to cut it 1 inch oversized at 90 degrees, then I'll take a side, 1 inch oversized at 90 degrees, then the back and the opposing side. Taking a moment to rough cut your parts and label the sequence that you cut them in will let the grain lines flow through the box and match up at each corner. I like to use the miter gauge to cut these tall miters. I back it with a piece of plywood. This does two things. It keeps it from chipping out in the back, and it pushes the waste piece through so it doesn't bind. Before you go ahead and cut all your miters, you want to check that your cut is 90 degrees along the edge. And you also want to check that it's 45 degrees so that when we assemble our box, the miters close perfectly. I like to make a second cut so that when I hold two 45s together, I can make sure that they actually equal 90 degrees. That looks perfect. We're ready to cut our boards to final length. When I know my miters are set up perfectly, I'm going to cut one mitered edge on each board, and then I'll use a stop to cut my fronts and backs to length, and then follow with another stop to cut my sides to length. With our miters cut and our panels dimensioned, this is our last chance to sand the interior of our box before assembly. Make sure you also round over the edges of your panel to make assembly easier. We're going to use packing tape as our clamp to glue our box together. We'll put one end of the tape in the vise and pull the tape taut and let the weight of the gun keep the tape taut. Now we'll lay out our parts in sequence. I'm going to press each piece of the box firmly against the packing tape and use one of the panels to line it up along the bottom. I also need to make sure that the tips of the miters line up. Often I'll start in the middle of the miter and slide it down towards the bottom so that the tips match perfectly. Now we're ready for our glue. I'll start squeezing the glue into the dados. We're just going to put it in the top and bottom dado, not in the center dado. After our box is assembled, we're going to open up the box and cut the lid off on the table saw, and that center dado is going to allow us to join the lid to the base of the box. After I get in the dados, I'll place it in the miters, and then I'll use a glue brush to spread the glue around. If you spread the glue out, you have much less glue to clean up later. With our glue spread out, we're ready to use the packing tape to clamp our box together. We'll install the top and bottom panels, and then release the packing tape from the vise, and slowly roll our box closed. Once you have the box closed, you're going to want to break the packing tape, and then take that piece and pull it as tight as you can. But this won't be enough pressure. You're going to need a second run of packing tape. You're going to pull this one as tight as you can and really make it stretch. Get some good pressure on there so that your box closes well. Once you think you have it good, break the packing tape and then lay the box flat. Press on opposing corners until those miters close and check every corner. When the glue dries, I get to peel off the packing tape and begin to plan my spline location. Remember, on the inside there's that dado 1.5 inches down from the bottom. We can't see it right now, but I want to know where it is. In between these two lines is where that dado lands. Now that I know where that is, I'll place 1 spline evenly on the lid and 2 on the bottom of the box. There are a lot of really good spline cutting fixtures out there that you can buy, or you can make one out of scrap in your shop. I made this one out of acrylic so you can see the process a little clearer and see exactly what the blade's doing. So now I'll cut my spline slots, and I'm going to use a stop. You'll notice I have a piece of scrap plywood to use as a stop, and I've put on 2 clamps. By using 2 clamps, I'm guaranteed that it won't move as I make each cut. I'll go through and cut each spline location on all 4 corners, and then move my stop over. This is going to give me nice, clean, consistent splines. Now that we have our spline slots cut, we can cut the splines to fit into the slots. Now I'll make my splines out of an accenting wood. This time I'll use walnut. I like to set the height of the blade so it's just a little bit higher than the stock. I also like to give myself a pencil line for the width of the spline. In this case it's 1/4 inch. Whenever you're cutting something this narrow, it's really important that you use a 0 tolerance throat plate. That red piece of plastic you see there around the blade is a 0 tolerance throat plate. It closely saddles the width of the blade so that as you're cutting your piece, nothing can fall into the throat and cause a problem. I also like to use a push stick to push the workpiece through safely. To make my assembly easier, I'm going to cut my splines to a rough length. I don't like cutting things this small in the chop saw. I much prefer to use the bandsaw, but you could just cut them by hand. Now that I've cut my splines to rough length, I'm ready to install them. I'll start by putting glue in my spline slots and spreading it around with the glue brush. I want to make sure that I get good glue saturation. Now I'm ready to install my spline. I like my splines to fit snugly. Snug enough that I need to tap them in with a mallet, but not so snugly that as they seat at the bottom of the spline slot, they cause the miter to crack. You'll also notice that I'm using a dead blow mallet to install it. This also helps prevent the miter from cracking, as it doesn't give as much shock as a hammer or a brass mallet. Once the glue on my splines is dry, I'll trim them flush. I like to use a Japanese flush trim saw for this. The teeth are pointed up so they don't scratch the primary surface that they're resting on. I also feel because it cuts on the pull stroke, I get a little bit more control when I'm doing this. Now that we've trimmed our splines flush, we're ready to separate the lid from the base of the box. We'll set the height of our blade just high enough to pierce through the maple. And we'll cut our short sides first. Then we'll finish with our long sides. This will ensure that we have enough wood against the fence as the lid separates from the base. So now I'll install a sacrificial fence on my table saw and cut a groove at the top of the base of the box to fit the lid. I might need to tap it over to get the full 1/4 inch length. If you have a shoulder plane, you can fine-tune that fit and get the lid to slide on perfectly. I like to put the box together and put it in the vise. Then I can sand my lid and my base all at once so that everything lines up. Make sure you break your edges. This will make the box more comfortable to handle and also make the finishing process easier. I'll put on some latex gloves and apply a wipe on finish in a well-ventilated area. I like to start on the inside corners and work my way towards the center. This prevents the finish from puddling in the corners. Once I have the interior done, I'll move on to the exterior of the box. In this case, I'm using General Finisher's Armor Seal. I find it's a good finish for both experienced and novice artisans. It gives good durable results quickly. Our Keepsake box is now complete and ready to hold our photos and mementos. Notice how the grain lines match up at each corner? Details like that make a project worthy of our memories.